Where did Tempest come from?
Where did Tempest come from? Tempest came from inside my brain.
Hey, friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Tempest from Wrestletalk and Parts Unknown.
That's me.
Just a heads up, guys. My voice may not be as strong as normal, just because of outside factors. We'll put it that way. But we'll try and make the best of this. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Can't control those outside factors all the time. You gotta keep them straight.
It was like I woke up this morning and was like, "Oh sugar," do you know what I mean? I'm sure you've had this. Like, I'm supposed to talk today, and this is gonna work. But anyway, as we get into you, where did your wrestling fandom begin?
My wrestling fandom, I mean, taking me back many, many years at this point. Honestly, it kind of started just from friends and neighbors all kind of being into it. You know, one of my very close childhood friends got into wrestling in about 2007 or so, and we were hanging out all the time, and so there would be a lot of discussion. We ended up playing like a lot of the WWE video games from around that time, SmackDown versus Raw, 2006, 2007, that sort of thing. And she was very much into the likes of like Jeff Hardy and Rey Mysterio and people like that. And we ended up playing like a WWE board game. And of course, two of the people that were assigned to me in that game were Edge and Rey Mysterio. So I had a little bit of a connection there. And we ended up watching SmackDown on January 25th, 2008. I can still remember the day. I remember the whole card, basically, the main event, CM Punk and Edge, just before the Royal Rumble, where Edge was facing Rey Mysterio. And from that point, like, I basically didn't miss a show for I don't even know how long. I was hooked. I got really into the likes of Edge, Mysterio, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Jeff Hardy, of course. It was a really good time to be a wrestling fan. You know, 2008, I feel like, was one of those really underrated years. But basically, once I got turned on to it, there was no way to turn me off for a while.
Fair enough. So you mentioned your childhood friend there that got you into wrestling. Was she encouraged? Like, was it a sort of thing where she was watching it and you saw her watching it? Or was it like she was, "Oh, come on, watch this with me," sort of thing?
A little bit of the latter, I would say. You know, we were just hanging out on a Friday, and we'd go over to our neighbor's house, and we would just, you know, do whatever we would do. We'd play video games, and this one night we just decided to watch SmackDown. And like, I think it was just a situation where I was in the room, but you know, it's like a lot of people watching wrestling who really get into it. You know, when you watch it for the first time and you just kind of like zone in on what you're seeing, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this is so incredible. You know, seeing The Undertaker for the first time, and Rey Mysterio and CM Punk and Edge and Batista, MVP. There were so many guys where like you're just kind of transfixed on it. So it wasn't necessarily a situation where it's like, oh, you got to see this wrestling stuff. She'd talk to me about it, of course, but I didn't have anything to go off of at that point. But once I started watching it, we were talking to each other on the phone about what happened on Raw and whatever, back when Raw was a bit more palatable. But
it was only
the early days were
then,
fun.
right?
Oh yeah.
So, and then as we move a bit more forward into the timeline, as you started watching wrestling, what was like your consumption of wrestling at this point? Was it strictly WWE? Was it outside of WWE? What was it?
For the first year, I would say it was pretty much primarily WWE. I would watch Raw, I'd watch SmackDown, I would watch ECW if I knew that something important was going to happen on ECW, because otherwise it was a little bit harder to watch in Canada. But otherwise, I mean, I was watching all the pay-per-views. I started buying DVDs and that sort of thing, and it was a really good time. It was not until probably about October or so of 2008 when I started watching TNA for the first time. And that first year, like, I was never a huge fan of TNA during those days. Like, there were guys, obviously, like, I watched it to see the old WWE guys first. You know, I loved watching guys like Kurt Angle and Booker T and guys like that, where there was some name recognition. And then Jeff Hardy and Rob Van Dam and those kind of guys came in later. But at that time, like, it was my first real exposure into the likes of guys like Samoa Joe and AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian, people like that, who eventually really started to grow on me. But the first year or so, it was mostly WWE. After that, some TNA kind of snuck in there. And it wasn't until a few years later that I started watching Ring of Honor. And then a few years after that I started watching things like New Japan.
Fair enough. So, again, staying in sort of the 2008 timeline for now, you mentioned how, in your eyes, and in my eyes as well, because that's my era, how underrated that era is. So if you were to pinpoint something from that era that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, what would you think it could be?
Oh, goodness. I mean, there's so many things, you know, like, it was just like, there was a really simple build to WrestleMania. There were things that I saw done that I thought were really well done at that time. Like, you go into No Way Out, and they've got the Elimination Chamber matches to determine your number one contenders for WrestleMania and that sort of thing. And every year since then, it's always felt like around that time, you kind of know what the plan is going to be, and you kind of know who's going to win those big number one contenders matches. Like, you know, nobody but Roman Reigns is going to win heading into WrestleMania. If this is 2018, you're fighting Brock Lesnar or something like that. But in 2008, they did such a good job of setting up challengers for Randy Orton heading into that WrestleMania, where if you had the Elimination Chamber match a month beforehand, any of Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Jeff Hardy could have easily won that match and taken their feud with Orton on to WrestleMania. You know, they'd all faced Randy Orton in the months leading up to that, really built him up well as a good heel champion. And then you go into WrestleMania, and of course, Triple H wins, but it doesn't have to be that way. You know, so there was a lot more variety, a lot more of that feeling of like anything can happen at that time. And then you just continue on throughout the year with really good rivalries like Edge and The Undertaker and Chris Jericho and Shawn Michaels. You, of course, had Jeff Hardy's run to the WWE title. There were just a lot of things that really made that era of WWE a lot easier to watch. And, of course, the roster was just like on another level at that time as well.
Do you think that you were saying it was easier to watch back then than it maybe is now? Do you think it being part of your job maybe has affected your ability to watch it? I hope that makes sense.
Within reason, I suppose. I mean, it's difficult to say, because in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. Like, I wouldn't watch WWE's programming at all right now if it wasn't my job, because I don't like it. You know, I don't like the product. You know, I don't watch Raw unless I have to for a review, and I watch SmackDown because it's my job. And similar now with NXT. If I didn't have to do that, I wouldn't. But on the same, you know, at the same time, like, I'm able to watch things that I do enjoy, like AEW Dynamite, AEW Rampage, and my job really doesn't affect any of that much. You know, if it's a good product, I enjoy watching it, and then I enjoy talking about it afterwards. That's kind of always how it's been with me, where doesn't necessarily matter that much if I have to do anything for work, but if it's good, I like it, and if it's not, I don't.
Fair enough. So you talked about 2008, and then as we move on, have you had a lapsed period from wrestling?
Very brief, I would say. There was maybe a year where I'd given up on wrestling a little bit. Not anything super extensive. Like, I was pretty much hooked on wrestling from about 2008 to about 2014. And I knew that the things that I was watching weren't as good as they were when I started. And I know that's kind of like a wrestling fan's favorite thing to say. You know, things were better back in my day and such and such. But getting into 2011 and 2012, 2013, 2014, where the booking of WWE just really started to not make sense. They didn't even, it didn't even feel like they were trying half the time in those days. And it was really starting to get frustrating. Yeah, I know. But there was a period of time where they didn't have to, but they still were trying. And you realize that had more to do with the people involved in those storylines and whatnot. But it got to about 2014 where when The Undertaker lost at WrestleMania and it was to Brock Lesnar, which at the time I didn't agree with that decision. I just kind of like threw in the towel for a little bit. There wasn't a whole lot keeping me around because I was a big CM Punk guy and CM Punk had just quit. So like my favorite guy was gone. A lot of the people that I liked from the era where I started watching wrestling had all kind of gone their separate ways from WWE. So I just kind of said, I'll give it a break for a bit. And it wasn't until I watched NXT about a year later that I started getting back into it.
What was it about 2014 that made you drop off? And then what was it about NXT that made you go, okay, I can watch this?
I just didn't feel like I was getting enough out of it for how much I was putting in at that point. Like I was really into wrestling stuff. Like my DVD collection had gotten absolutely massive. I was watching TV, every week, no matter how bad it was. And I was starting to kind of get burnt out on it. And it wasn't until like I saw Finn Balor in NXT for the first time where I just went, wow, this guy is like so cool. I saw the Demon entrance either the first or second time that he'd done it. And I was like, well, this is the coolest thing that I've seen in I don't know how long. And that kind of got me hooked a little bit more. And then just watching NXT in like 2014, 2015 was where I really started going like, oh my God, this is like the kind of wrestling I enjoy. It's simple storytelling. The matches are good. You don't need the crazy bombastic storylines, but there still are storylines. And there was just a whole mix of everything that I would have liked to have seen in wrestling for so many years being presented under a WWE banner at that point. Like it was just an easy fix for me to just say, all right, well, that's the wrestling I'm going to watch now.
And then obviously you brought up how NXT isn't your favorite thing so much anymore. Is that because of the 2.0 era, or did that start happening before that?
I'd say it started happening before that. I mean, I am very much not a fan of NXT 2.0 for sure, but basically from when AEW kind of launched, I felt that they lost a lot of what kind of made them special in NXT. They were still able to put on really good shows. And of course, I think like TakeOver Portland, the last great takeover before the pandemic, I thought that was like one of the top 5 takeovers of all time. Like they were still rolling in terms of their big shows, but that same kind of like really thoughtful storytelling where they were able to plan things out and not go live every week. They were able to just take their time with their storylines and that sort of thing. That really kind of stopped happening when they went to USA, in my opinion. And once they stopped going to that kind of storytelling, I just didn't find what I wanted in pro wrestling in NXT anymore. There were still good matches for sure, but AEW just kind of became like, oh, you don't like the main roster? You can watch this and it'll be your favorite show. And it's sad to say, but that's kind of what happened for me.
Pretty much I was the same, to be completely honest. But do you think that going head to head with AEW, the way that they did for, you may be able to tell me this, but I can't remember how many weeks it was in total in the end.
Oh, I can't remember. My brain has gone so far past remembering numbers and things like that when it comes to this. But no, I don't think it was something that was necessary. WWE, they wanted to take the fight to AEW, even though they'll say that they didn't and everything. But Vince doesn't like to lose. Yeah. He doesn't like to lose in any aspect. So when this new wrestling company is kind of the hot new thing, he's like, all right, we'll put our hot show against them. And you kind of got the sense that maybe NXT wasn't quite as cool as it once was at that point. Like, it didn't feel like the underground show for the hardcore fans anymore, like the diehard fans that had been run off of WWE. It wasn't their show anymore. It then just became, well, this is the WWE show. And for a long time, people liked it because it didn't feel like a WWE show.
If they hadn't gone head to head with AEW and maybe just gone straight onto Tuesday nights or just stayed on the network, do you think that underground feel would have stayed? And do you think maybe the underground feel was lost because they were reacting to AEW's booking?
A little bit, a little bit. I think that if they had stayed on the network, it would have maintained a lot of that hardcore NXT audience. Because at that point, it doesn't become about the ratings. It doesn't become about like, oh, well, what are you watching on Wednesday night? It's just like, okay, there are two really good wrestling shows to watch this week. And it doesn't really matter when you watch them or which one you watch first. You know, it would still be about the wrestling, but everything became about, okay, the demos and the viewership and everything of that nature, which I still don't think many of the normal fans care about, but it became such a thing online that the Wednesday Night War was kind of like invented by proxy. That being said, if they had not done that, I think you could have just enjoyed the shows, you know? And I don't think it would have forced them to change the way that they were doing their shows. And that was the biggest thing to me, because after that point, like I can't think of like an emotional story, an emotionally fulfilling storyline in NXT maybe since. Like it depends on how you feel about like the broser weights was pretty good, but it got cut short. And then there was nothing really emotional until like the index stuff, which I've been very public in my dislike for.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think the moment, and this isn't about me, so we ain't going to go into this for too long. The moment I gave up on NXT was when they hot-shotted Keith Lee becoming a double champion.
Yeah.
It
No,
was
I
like,
agree. That's one of the bigger examples of them hot shotting and just doing something to counter program AEW. And that should never be the goal, you know, in my opinion. Like you book your storylines the way that you're gonna go, they're gonna book theirs the way that they're gonna go, and then whoever's got the best product is gonna win. You know, ultimately that should kind of be it. And I think we just found out who had the better product in the end.
fair enough. So I want to go into like your weekly consumption of wrestling currently. But before we do that, how did you get into Wrestletalk?
How did I get into Wrestletalk? It's been a long journey getting into Wrestletalk, honestly. Like, because I was finishing up university in 2018, and they put out a video saying that, hey, we're launching our website. If you want to write for us, send 2 pieces of sample writing to such and such email address. And initially, I just kind of like went, yeah, all right, whatever, because I was in a sport media program at university, so this sort of thing was really up my alley. But I'd never really given a lot of thought to like writing for wrestling. It just wasn't something that had occurred to me. But at that point, I just said, screw it. You know what? If I get a bad answer back, then it's like an hour of my time gone. And if I get it, then I get a new gig. So basically, that's what I did. I sent 2 pieces of sample writing to the email address, and they said, hey, we like it. We want you to write for us. And I wrote for the website for about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, because the site launched just before WrestleMania 34. So it was like March or so of 2018. And I was writing for them until about December of 2019, when the lovely Randy Andy Datson said, hey, we want to have a new full-time staff writer on the website. Would you be interested? And of course I said yes, because I didn't want to go and work retail or work in a garage like I had been doing. So I just said, yeah, sure, man, let's do it. And so I stayed in that role for probably about a year, just doing website things. You know, we were all editors and making sure that features got done and news got covered. And it wasn't until about a year later that I really started doing more things on air. And that has transformed greatly. And I just kind of like this company is really, really good. It's very fluid, very flexible. So if we need something done, there are people who are going to get it done. And there's a lot of people that will, you know, make sure that that everyone's kind of moving up, you know, at the same time. You know, things are getting done. And if you work hard, you'll be rewarded for it.
Mm-hmm. One of your Twitter bios at one point was, no one cared who I was till I started wearing a mask. I don't know if that is currently, because I'll be honest, I didn't check, which is very unprofessional. I do apologize for that.
It's okay. I don't even remember what it is right now either. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still there. Nobody cared who I was until I put on the mask. Yeah, that's right.
So where did the Tempest, is character the right word? Persona?
I don't know. I don't really know, to tell you the truth. I don't know whether this is a character, a persona, an alias. I don't know what the proper word to describe it really is.
All right, I'll put it this way. Where did Tempest come from?
Where did Tempest come from? Tempest came from inside my brain. I started trying to train to wrestle at the start of 2020,
Okay.
and I don't want to say like I was by no means a natural at any of this, but at the same time, there were things that I was able to do that kind of clicked for me. So I'll put my wrestling training that way. I was by no means like an athletic freak getting everything on the first try, but there was a lot of things that I did better than others. That being said, I was told like, hey, your first match is going to be whenever, come up with a name, come up with whatever. And I was like, okay. And I've been thinking of different wrestling names for my whole life. You know, you create a wrestler, and in whatever video game, you make a wrestler and you give him a name. And for whatever reason on that week, I had landed on Tempest. That was going to be my name. I think I may have been looking at like a Yu-Gi-Oh card that had inspired me just in terms of the design. So I was like, okay, that's what it's going to be. And then I had a wrestling match, you know, coming out of training, and then the pandemic hit, and you know, I was fully committed to, hey, we're gonna be a wrestler, we're gonna go and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do our next show in May, thinking that the pandemic was only gonna last like 3 weeks. Little did I know,
Yeah.
and
Little did we all know.
realistically, like I don't know where along the line that kind of changed, but once I started doing on-air stuff for Wrestletalk, you know, like I just decided I was going to wear a mask, you know, when I wrestled, you know, and I wore a mask during my first match. So I was like, well, if I'm doing on-air stuff, like I have to wear the mask, you know, like I can't be wearing a mask as a wrestler and not be wearing a mask when I'm doing wrestling stuff on the internet. So I just wore the mask, and then it just kind of became a trademark of mine, more or less. Like now I'm the YouTuber that wears a mask.
I think, at least from my perspective, it makes you distinctive.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. And I was having a conversation with one of my buddies who is a gear maker. Shout out to Sway Archer. If anybody's ever looking for gear, he does great work. We were talking about it after I had tweeted last week that I was basically going to give up being Tempest the wrestler and just be Tempest. And he was just like, yeah, man, keep the mask. Like it's different, you know, makes you distinct, gives you something that is totally you. And like, you know, no one else is wearing a luchador mask and being a wrestling YouTuber. And even still, like, if I ever want to change things up, I can get new masks. I can switch up the color palettes because Lord knows the first 2 months of the pandemic, all I did was design different colored masks. So I've got plenty of masks to go through over time. But yeah, I think it works for me.
So, where did the masks ultimately come from? Was it your friend that was a gear maker, or did you make them yourself?
No, it wasn't from him. There was at one point we tried to work out something that he'd get a mask made for me, but the pandemic was very hard on everybody, of course. The first mask that I wore was actually a replica of a Dr. Wagner Jr. mask that my wonderful friend Luke Perone lent me for that first show because everything came together very last minute. And then after that, we kind of just like designed a mask, you know, and it's more or less what you see here. A little bit different in places for sure, but you know, the original color palette being the blue, yellow, and green. And I just kind of like I had this idea for a logo kind of in my head. Like this was my creation. Everything else was basically a friend of mine who's very good at graphic design and that sort of thing. And we kind of put those two together, and then I just like put that into Photoshop and clicked around and made all the different color palettes.
Okay. So, you mentioned previously that you're no longer Tempest the wrestler. Does that mean you've shut the door on your wrestling career, or shut the door for now?
I mean, I think it all depends on just kind of how life goes, you know, like if I have wrestled my last match, then I'm confident to close the door on that and be satisfied. Like I was able to wrestle a match and write that off my bucket list. That's totally fine with me. I'm satisfied if that's the case. If Because it was also something that I really enjoyed doing. And I don't know how much of this I should be saying, but I personally wasn't the biggest fan of the school that I was training at. So I basically made the decision that I didn't really want to go back to the school after the pandemic kind of died down a little bit. But if there are other schools where it made sense for me to spend an exorbitant amount of money to go and learn how to wrestle and actually like commit to it and everything, then I'm not opposed to doing something like that, because I did enjoy it. I got into wrestling in the first place doing it, myself, just so I could have a better understanding of the business and understand better how people do what they do and the psychology of things and things like that. So it's still something that I'm very interested in, obviously, but it's just at a point in my life where, at the start of my training, I was newly 23 and now I'm past 25, and it is getting a little bit more difficult to justify that kind of commitment, both financially and with my time and everything, just because I'm getting older. I've got a job, I've got relationships, I've got different things that I need to put my energy towards. If I could go back and start all this when I was 18, yeah, I'd probably do it. But if it doesn't happen again, I'm not worried.
In that case, with all your commitment, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
It's my pleasure, man. It's my pleasure.
So, as you said about your wrestling career, so how many matches did you ultimately end up having? Was it just the one?
I would, technically speaking, I would probably say just the one. If I had one in front of an audience, I'll put it that way. We had one in training. We probably had a few in training. One that I would confidently say we had in training, and then one in front of an audience, which was like the last thing that I did before the pandemic hit. It was like March 14th or something like that. And then when we went outside on Monday, they were like, oh no, the world shut down. So one, I guess you could say two, but I'll say one. It's an easier number to remember.
Fair enough. So, as you have experience wrestling, can you use anything from your wrestling training to influence the way you make content and stuff like that?
I mean, a little bit. I don't want to ever, put on my my analyst hat and be like, well, from my experience wrestling for however much time I was doing it, because it's not that much, and I don't want to put forth the idea. I don't want to oversell the idea that like, oh, I was this great wrestler and everything. But there are definitely things that I learned while I was doing that influenced the way that I look at wrestling, without a doubt.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just kind of like I notice people's footwork so much more now. There was a clip that went around Twitter at some point this year of Steve Mongo McMichael from WCW. And he got in the ring, and I swear to God, in like a 5-second clip, he must have taken like 25 steps. His feet were just stutter stepping everywhere he went. And it was like completely wigging me out. Like I can't watch it. If you have bad footwork in wrestling, it really drives me nuts now. And that's kind of like a new development for me. So there are definitely things that influence the way I look at wrestling, but not an exorbitant amount, I would say.
What about watching wrestling for, I guess, entertainment purposes? Can you watch like bigger bumps, or because you might know what they do to your body, you're like, oh, I gotta look away now?
Yeah, no, that part of thing doesn't really bother me that much, obviously. I mean, if something's a ridiculous bump, then I'll still cringe and go like, oh my God. But the fact that I've taken bumps in my life probably doesn't influence that a terrible amount. Like if something's a bad bump, I'm going to cringe either way.
Would you have done that before your wrestling experience?
I think so. Like there's a lot of things where, if you take a solid bump, I'm never going to cringe because of like a superplex or something like that. Like that's big, but it's done properly and it shouldn't hurt that much. But when I see like Kenny Omega take a Hurricane Rana and land flat back on the floor from the top rope,
Oh no!
like nothing that you could ever do or train me to do is going to make me feel any more comfortable watching that.
Isn't that the bump that Kenny has said on record? Yep, not doing that again.
Yeah, I think he said it's the worst bump he's ever taken, which hell yeah, I mean, you see it and I like it drives me nuts every single time I see it. It's oh, stomach churning.
Definitely. So as we go into like your consumption of wrestling currently, what are you currently watching? What do you have to watch? And then what do you choose to watch for like leisure?
I mean, it changes week to week, obviously. I have to watch SmackDown, Rampage, and NXT each week. Those are the ones that I have to watch for our various reviews on Wrestletalk podcast. But otherwise, I mean, I watch Dynamite because, yeah, subscribe to Wrestletalk podcast, of course. You can see my lovely not face and Chopper Pete's actual face. I watch Dynamite because I like watching it. It's a good show that I enjoy watching. So that's kind of like my leisure wrestling watch each week. And then everything else, like, I mean, I was watching some indie stuff this past weekend, you know, on IWTV. And this coming weekend, I'm going to be watching Final Battle for Ring of Honor. I will still watch the big matches for New Japan anytime I really get the chance. But at a certain point, you just kind of like lose track of hours in the day, and watching wrestling for leisure kind of does fall through the cracks a little bit. I mean, a week ago, I spent like a whole day off just watching old matches from WWE, you know, matches from like the Ruthless Aggression era and that sort of thing. So I'm still able to like sit down and watch wrestling if I want to watch wrestling. But otherwise, usually if there's like a match that gets rated like 4.5 stars or better in the Observer from like another promotion like Stardom or Pro Wrestling Noah or AAA or something like that, I'll make time to watch those matches. But otherwise, it's basically whatever I can watch whenever I have time.
Fair enough. So what is the show that out of all the ones that you have to watch that you're like, and I think I know the answer, but what's the one that you're like, I've got to do this now? And then what's the one that you're like, oh, I get to do this as part of my job? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, the easy answer to the second part of that question is Rampage. You know, like of the 3 shows that I have to watch each week, I watch Rampage and I'm just like, okay, I know I'm not going to get pissed off watching this show. I'm just going to watch it. It's going to be fine. It's going to be an hour. It's going to be fun. And then I'm going to talk about it and then I don't have to think about it again. It's really a toss up between NXT and SmackDown at this point. And it goes back and forth every week as to which one I dread watching more. Like, we've had a couple of really bad weeks in a row of watching SmackDown, like some really poor episodes. So when it comes to things like that, I would probably say like SmackDown probably takes the cake. But at the same time, like NXT 2.0 is a rough watch sometimes, you know, and it doesn't hurt me as much watching SmackDown because like I was never emotionally attached to SmackDown. It's not like SmackDown just recently got bad. It's just like sometimes it has good episodes, sometimes it has bad. But man, like NXT was my jam, you know, just until real recently, and then it's very much not my jam now. So I trying to come up with like a decisive answer between those two is really tough. I'll probably say
I
NXT,
understand
honestly.
that. By
Probably
the way,
NXT just because I have to do the written edited review for it and talk so much more about it than I have to talk about SmackDown. It probably takes the cake in that aspect.
by the way, and this is going to be a total fanboy thing, but whenever anyone from WrestleTalk says jam, I can't think without thinking jam that jam. And that is so fanboy, and I do apologize for that.
No, I get it, man. I mean, I've got a jam that jam tattoo now.
Didn't
because
you
of
have
all
to
this.
get that for Quizzlemania or something?
Yeah, we did. We did our charity stream for the Mayo Clinic following the passing of Brody Lee last year, and it was last January. And you know, I was very happy to be able to raise so much money. And I, like I said, like yeah, my It doesn't matter to me. I've got tattoos everywhere, you know? So like, hey, if me getting a dumb tattoo is going to get us closer to a charity goal, like I have no problem doing that. So we reached our goals. And then 6 months later, as soon as I could get a new tattoo because of the pandemic, I made sure to go out and do that. So it doesn't bother me. I forget it's there most of the time.
Fair enough. This might sound like a bit of a backhanded question. And if it comes out a bit wrong, I do apologize. But because you wear the mask, do you find it easier to make a fool of yourself on YouTube, sort of thing?
Not really.
And again, if that sounds disrespectful, I do apologize.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. Like, I find it easy to make a fool of myself no matter what on YouTube. You know, like
Yeah.
I think if I didn't wear a mask, I would have no problem doing the things that I do and everything. I'd dress up like Jeff Hardy and do a dumb dance and edit that into my videos. Like, I don't have a problem doing any of that. Honestly, I think just wearing the mask kind of helps with just general, like, I don't have to make sure that my hair looks good in the morning. I can just throw this on and it's easier. And then when I go out for wrestling shows, I can just kind of exist and not be approached, which sometimes, like, yeah, I'll throw the mask on and you know, talk to fans at shows and that sort of thing. But I like having the option to not do that.
That answers like a bunch of follow-up questions. So I do appreciate that. Basically, those follow-up questions were going to be, does the mask make like your daily life easier? Because like, obviously, I take it you don't wear it like when you go to the shops and stuff.
Oh, I mean, the mask never comes off, my friend. This mask is
sorry,
is part of me. Of course. I mean, yeah, like I've never been approached by someone in the street knowing who I was. You know, it's been limited to wrestling events and wrestling. You know, I've been recognized like at wrestling gyms and that sort of thing. But otherwise, like, it's never been anything that I really needed to worry about.
One thing I am curious about, going back to like wrestling training, actually, you may not be able to answer this, but when wrestlers are training and they wear a mask, do they train in the mask, or is that only when they wrestle an official match?
I mean, they don't do it to like protect their identity or anything like that, but they do they do tell you to, hey, if you're going to wear a mask, like, wear it in training, get used to it. You know, it's going to be probably harder for you to breathe. It's going to be harder for you to see. You know, if it doesn't fit, it could, you know, get turned, and all of a sudden then your vision is blocked. So they make sure that you go and do your spots and your roles and everything, and make sure that you're able to do them with the mask. Because I mean, if it's just a cosmetic thing, but it's going to make you a significantly worse wrestler, it's not really worth doing.
It's a bit like, all right then, favorite wrestling mask of all time, and then actually we are now going to go into a segment that I call generic questions, which these are essentially questions that I'm sure you get asked on Twitter a lot. I'm sure you've been asked a lot in maybe some previous videos, but like, this will just give you a place to be like, look, I've answered this in this interview. Go check this out.
Very, very much appreciated. I mean, favorite wrestling mask ever? Oh, it's a tough one. It's probably Jushin Thunder Liger. I gotta be honest. Like, there's a lot of really cool masks. There's a lot of ones that I really, really do enjoy. But I mean, Jushin Thunder Liger is just like, he's an anime character. He's an anime character come to life. Like the same way that people looked at like Hulk Hogan and people like Randy Savage and be like, oh, they're superheroes in real life. That's an anime character in real life, you know, and that to me is just as cool. So I'd probably say Jushin Thunder Liger.
Favorite match of all time?
Favorite match of all time is Hangman Page and Kenny Omega against the Young Bucks at Revolution.
Why? Because that's not a common. Because that's not a common.
I was there. Yeah. For a long time, like, I didn't know if I had like a specific wrestling match that was my favorite that I'd seen. It might have been like Andrade and Gargano, again, because I was there for that. But that was, to me, just like, it was the best match in a storyline that I really cared about. I was really invested in. I was really invested in all the characters, and I was there. And also, I think it's like the best tag team match of all time. So it's a really good mixture of everything that I wanted on that night.
Were you happy with the conclusion or current conclusion to that storyline? I'm sure they'll pick it up again.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure this is all going to lead to a big elite reunion down the line, maybe facing off against another stable or something like that. I don't know. I don't have the book. I really loved the end of that storyline. I thought that Hangman Page and Kenny Omega had a fantastic match, all things considered, and with a really fantastic ending. You know, it was a little bit soap opera, but, you know, sometimes soap operas can be good. And this was a soap opera storyline done right to me.
One of my carers said this to me the other day because I was watching it as she came in, and she was like, wrestling is just soap opera with a little bit more violence. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, but I like it.
Yeah, soap operas can be good. There's a reason that soap operas are popular.
And that they've been on for so long.
Exactly.
Favorite pay-per-view of all time?
Oh, favorite pay-per-view of all time. There's a lot of really good ones. It's hard not to say WrestleMania 17 because that is as good as it gets in wrestling, truthfully. But honestly, at this point, again, because I was there, I think I might have to say All Out 2021.
Ooh. What was that experience like? Because obviously we had technically 4 debuts if you count Punk's debut, in-ring debut. But what was it like to be in the crowd to experience like the Ruby Soho, the Adam Cole, and the Bryan Danielson debut?
It was really special. You know, it was really cool. It felt big time. It felt like you were there for like this huge crowning moment that this company has kind of been building towards for really 2.5, 3 years at that point. It was really cool. You know, I didn't think there was like a bad match on the show. Obviously, like Paul White and QT Marshall were like not out there to have a great match.
Still fun.
It was still fun, but it's like a 3-minute match. You know, it was what it should have been. But otherwise, you know, you had the tag cage match, which I thought was the best cage match of all time. You had Minoru Suzuki coming out, and I'm sitting around some pretty hardcore wrestling fans. You know, we're all, because I was there as press. And everybody there, I'm sitting next to Sean Ross Sapp on one side of me, Izzy's on the other side of me, Phil Lindsay's behind me, Denise Salcedo's in front of me. So I'm just surrounded by people who really love wrestling. And you get moments like Minoru Suzuki coming out, and Phil and I are marking out, and we're screaming Kaze ni Nare, and that's really cool. You got good matches. You got a big title change in the cage. And then you got Ruby Soho coming out, which I think everybody kind of knew that one was coming. But still, it was really cool to see her win and really get that big reaction. And then you got Punk's debut, which was really cool because obviously it was in Chicago. And then you get your back-to-back debuts with Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson. And that sort of thing, it felt very big. It felt very big. It was very cool.
If I said to you, pick your favorite out of them 4, what would it be?
I would probably say Adam Cole. Honestly, of all of them, it was either going to be Adam Cole or Bryan Danielson. And Bryan Danielson's was this exceptionally cool because I think a lot of people were kind of like, okay, the pay-per-view's probably done. They'll save Bryan Danielson for a little bit later. And then for him to come out right as they were closing the show, that like there was a real buzz in that building at that point. But Adam Cole coming out was just kind of like, it was really cool to see a guy who was NXT through and through, obviously had every reason to stay in NXT, but still chose to go to AEW. Like it felt like a party when he came in, and that was probably my favorite.
What has been, and based on how you just spoke about that one, I think I know the answer, but what has been your favorite pay-per-view to attend live?
It would have to be All Out. I mean, I've seen some really good ones. I've had really good track record with pay-per-views over the years. You know, I went to Survivor Series 2016 when they did Brock and Goldberg. That was pretty nutty. You know, SummerSlam 2019, Royal Rumble 2018, obviously Revolution 2020. But I would probably have to say that All Out 2021 was about as good as it gets.
Moment you wish you were in the crowd for, but when?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good question. Like there's a lot that I think a lot of people wouldn't even wouldn't even think of. Like, I really wish that I was there for when Mark Henry won the world heavyweight title. You know,
Okay.
like, he gets the pin, and he's a heel through and through at that point, but he gets the pin, and that crowd comes unglued because, like, all of the people that were there, it's a lot of like adult male voices just like losing their minds because they know that they just seen something really big, you know. And the match itself wasn't really anything special, but that moment and then the promo afterwards is like perfect wrestling theater, you know, to me. And to see someone like Mark Henry, who really deserved a moment like that after so long, see him get his, that was pretty cool. So I don't know if that's the number one moment, but that's one I'm confident with.
A generic question I should have asked you earlier, but favorite mask that you've ever worn?
Favorite mask that I've ever worn, I'd probably have to say this one. It's the most comfortable.
Fair enough. When you put your masks together, is comfort a big thing?
Sure is now. Holy smokes. You know, it came up every once in a while on Quizlemanias and that sort of thing, but my blue, yellow, and green mask was not very comfortable. You know, I don't know what the people who were making it were thinking, but this mask, of course, people make fun of it because it looks like it got a big nose, but it's made properly where, you know, it comes to a point, it sticks out. The other one had a line of twill going right across the bridge of my nose, basically.
Oh no.
And it pushed my nose up into my into my face. And I just like, I couldn't do it. There you go. I couldn't deal with it.
I had one the other day, like, or quite a while ago by the time this goes out, where the person just would not stop. So now I'm just like, yes, where I'm not monetized anyway.
I do my best to try and keep it to a minimum, of course. I usually let maybe one or so slip out on a podcast here and there, but I do my best. But yeah, I could not handle that mask for much longer. You know, there were times after Quizlemanias where I'd take the mask off and my nose would just be like red, like Rudolph's nose, just like a cherry tomato, just so I knew I needed the next one to be as comfortable as possible, and thankfully this one is a much better fit.
Wrestling moment moment in Wrestletalk that you felt like, okay, this is where I belong now.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that there's like one specific answer, but it might be the first time I ever did a Patreon call. You know, once we do our Patreon calls for $100 backers every month, and for a long time that just wasn't my job to do. You know, I wasn't part of like the regular cast. And then I think it was like right after Pete and I started doing the NXT and SmackDown podcast together earlier this year that they put me on the rotation, and it was Pete and I doing these and Andy and I doing those. And once I did the first one, I was like, okay, I'm part of the actual cast now. And I think that was probably like, I don't know if I had an I made it moment, but that's probably the closest thing to it.
That's really nice to hear, man. And then the final generic question before I give you the question that I end all my interviews on is favorite. Oh no, we've done favorite pay-per-view you attended live. Pay-per-view. Oh no, wait, no, we've done moment as well. Oh yeah, favorite superstar. That was it. Sorry, my brain doesn't work very well.
Not a problem, my friend. I mean, favorite wrestler of all time is Edge. Edge is my guy. Edge has always been my guy. There's a autograph hanging above me of Edge right now. You know, he's my guy. He's basically always been my guy. He will probably always continue to be my guy.
What has been your thoughts on his comeback?
I wish that he would wrestle people I was interested in watching him wrestle. You know, we've gotten a few matches like that since his return, but I wasn't big on the idea of him wrestling Randy Orton at WrestleMania last year. I thought that they could have had that moment be given to like a new, younger guy, whether they did the Seth Rollins match there or he had just injured AJ Styles in the Royal Rumble that year. You could have worked something in there. You know, I thought there were better choices for that, but for the most
Then
part,
wouldn't
I
have
think
got AJ Taker.
What can you do? But yeah, I mean, I think that the performances that he's given off, that first WrestleMania match notwithstanding, I think for the most part, they've all been really, really good. You know, I loved his rivalry with Seth Rollins. I thought that was really good stuff. But now he's wrestling The Miz, and like they had a good promo battle for sure. But I would rather Edge wrestle people that he hasn't wrestled before. And there's a lot of them. Like, I'd rather have him just go out and pay-per-view after pay-per-view, wrestle Finn Balor, wrestle AJ Styles, wrestle this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And we don't have that much time with Edge, you know? Like, I feel like
What's
you
he
need
got?
to get
A
these
3-year
matches
contract, doesn't he?
I think so, you know, and I mean, good Lord, like he came back at like 47 or 48. Like, you know, you got to pretend that each of these matches could be his last, just like that's just the reality of things. And I don't want his last match and his last rivalry to be against The Miz.
Fair enough. So, as we wrap this up, obviously, I want to say thank you for coming on, Tempest. Like, this has been a pleasure.
Of course. Likewise.
Before I do my final question, I want to give you the floor, though. Plug away, my friend.
Oh, my Lord. There's always so many things to plug. Well, of course, you can follow me on Twitter. That's at TempestWT. You can subscribe to me on YouTube, Tempest Likes Wrestling. That has changed. It formerly was Tempest the Wrestler. Now Tempest Likes Wrestling. I do wrestling videos and video essays and things of that nature. Also, of course, make sure you subscribe to Wrestletalk and all Wrestletalk related shows, that being Wrestletalk Podcast, Parts Fun Known. Subscribe to No Rules Barred. I'm not really on that one, but we love board games just the same. Make sure you do all that. We've still got merch, LIW merch. You can find at WrestleShop.com. And I believe that's all of my plugs. I always try and make like a checklist to go through everything that I need to plug at the end of one of these shows. But I think that's all of them. So like and subscribe to everything.
I'm doing that in my head currently as I get ready to do mine. But the question I end all my interviews on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with stuff like that, we're obviously all going to live forever in some sort of way. So what is one video that you're like, don't go back and watch that? Like, I've grown a lot since then. And then what is one that you're like, yes, I'm really proud of that. If you want to see my body of work, check that one out.
Well, I mean, the former could be any of my first videos from WrestleTalk, honestly. Like I did a show for a while on WrestleTalk clips, which was then turned into WrestleTalk 2, which was then turned into Wrestle Luke, which was then turned back into Wrestle 2, which I believe now is WrestleTalk Podcast. I could be wrong, but there was a lot of changing around with that channel. Bottom line, I did a show called the WrestleTalk Recap, which I look back and I'm just like, oh, I'm just not as smooth and as clean and as well presented as I would like to be. So never go back and watch any of those. They're not worth it. Not really that interesting either. Like the concept needed to be tweaked, and maybe we'll try something similar to it again one day, but maybe not. That being said, if you want to see something that I am proud of, most of the stuff on my own personal YouTube channel is stuff that I've really poured my heart into, really have done a good job on, I think. That being like how WWE fixed Roman Reigns, I think was a good video of mine, just going over the changes that they've done to him. The Wrestling's Greatest Rivalries piece that I did on Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho, I think is probably my best work in terms of like a long form story driven piece. I think those two really came out well as far as my own YouTube channel. And over on Parts Fun Known, I just recently put out the how AEW made a perfect millennial babyface with the, of course, story of Hangman Page and his run to the AEW World Championship. That one's basically all me and our wonderful editors, of course. So that, as far as WrestleTalk content goes, that's probably what I would point people to. Otherwise, go subscribe and see everything I got over there.
It's well worth doing, guys. Obviously, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Irish. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Irish, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.